Welcome, everyone. Here we are on a Tuesday at the Farm to Early Childhood in New England webinar. We're going to be talking about the current landscape and have an opportunity for some collaborative strategizing. We are so glad you're all joining us today. My name is Dana Stevens. I'm the project director at Farm to Institution New England, or FINE, as our friends like to call us. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat with your name, your affiliation, if you like, and the part of the world you're calling in from today. We encourage you to ask questions throughout this webinar in the chat, and we will do our best to answer them as we go. There will be a chance to ask questions in the breakout conversations later today, and we'll certainly follow up with you if we don't get to you during our time together today. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about FINE. We are a 6-state network working collaboratively to mobilize the power of institutions to transform our food system. And FINE supports this network in a variety of ways. We organize trainings, we convene different groups, and host the biennial Northeast Farm to Institution Summit, which we just had this past April in Rhode Island. We find, share, and celebrate stories about farm to institution work in the region. We conduct research, we support partner policy initiatives, and our work covers several sectors, and we're thrilled to have added early childhood to the tapestry in the last few years. You can learn lots more about some of the exciting work we're doing to center community in farm to institution work, leverage institutional markets to support regional dairy industry, and support the development of regional local food purchasing incentives on our website, or follow up with us after this webinar. We love hearing from folks. We are really lucky today to have an amazing group of folks here to share this work with you. I'm honored to introduce you to the members of our community of practice for this project. First, my colleague, Hannah Layton, our Director of Strategic Impact, is joining us from New York. From Connecticut, we have Shannon Rader Ginsburg from Yukon Extension. Joining us from Maine, we have Dawn L. Gordon from MCD Global Health and the Healthy Kids, Healthy Future Initiative. Ashley Edmondson, also from Maine, and the Let's Go program. From New Hampshire, we have Dr. Noreen Mena from the University of New Hampshire. We have Kate Graves from UNH Extension. From our Rhode Island team, we're joined by Dr. Allison Tovar from Brown University and Heidi Hetzler from the University of Rhode Island SNAP Ed program. We're also joined from Vermont by Keely Agan from Hunger Free Vermont, Cynthia Green from Shelburne Farms and Vermont Feed. And from Massachusetts, we have Irene Sedlacko from the Massachusetts Department of Early and Secondary Education and Rena Zampiron from Massachusetts Audubon. So you will get to know and hear from each of these amazing people over the course of our time today. And I'd also like to note that two of our community of practice members, Zania Johnson from Yukon Extension and Marissa Romano from MCD Global Health, were not able to be with us on the call today, but they have been great and important contributors to this work. So our plan for this webinar is to share a little bit of background about Farm to Early Childhood, the New England Farm to Early Childhood project, out of which this ecosystem assessment came from. We'll do a quick walkthrough of the ecosystem assessment that we completed last spring, and that will set us up for what we hope are dynamic and engaging breakout conversations around a few of the key recommendations from that research. And we really look forward to hearing your questions and thoughts and experiences that you're bringing to this conversation later on, so please stick around for those. So to get us all on the same page, the definition we're using for farm to early childhood is one that includes these following activities: access to nutritious, regional, culturally appropriate foods, nutrition education, and hands-on agricultural experiences. And we want to point out that people come to this work from many different angles, and there are so many potential impacts of equitable farm to early childhood programs, which is part of what makes this such an exciting intersectional sector and opportunity to affect change. This slide shows a compilation of just some of the reasons for doing this work identified by our community of practice. And just some quick stats to help us understand the scale and scope of this sector in New England. At the time that we did our research, there were nearly 15,000 early childhood sites across New England. And those sites collectively have the capacity to serve almost 500,000 children and employ almost 80,000 people. So it's a very broad and diverse sector. The New England Farm to Early Childhood Project was an idea born out of a collaboration between FINE and the Northeast Farm to School Collaborative. That group is a collection of farm to school innovators comprised of leaders from 7 Northeast states and the USDA who work within their states and regionally to advance farm to school through networking, peer sharing, collaborative projects, policy, and convenings. And that group has been around since 2008 and has greatly advanced farm to school policy and programming in our region. And they also started FINE. And so the collaborative has been and is a partner of this project and really a model for the Farm to Early Childhood Project community of practice that we've formed. Together, we submitted a proposal to USDA in 2020, and we were awarded a farm to school grant in September 2021, which is this project. Thank you, USDA. So just briefly, there are 3 main parts of this project that we've been doing for 2 years. You know, as I mentioned, the community of practice was our first big effort and is really the core, the central piece of this work. All the folks I introduced at the start of the webinar are members of that group. And as you can see, there are 2 or more interest holders from each New England state that comprise that group and work together. We've been meeting monthly since January 2022, and it's been an incredibly rich learning community that has led to some great strides in each state, which you'll hear more about in our breakout conversations. And I just have to say, supporting and witnessing this group create change together and support one another has been one of the highlights of my own work over the last 2 years. So the first big project we set out to do together was figure out what was happening with farm to early childhood in New England, what that landscape looked like in each state and together as a region. And we wanted to identify successes to build on and opportunities to increase the accessibility of equitable farm to early childhood programs, which became our ecosystem assessment, which we'll dig into in just a moment. So the work that we're focusing on right now is developing some professional development opportunities for educators across the region, which you'll hear more from Massachusetts and Vermont in their breakout session later, and offering a small number of farm to EC starter kits to providers in each state. And we're also beginning to think about our next round of funding and which opportunities outlined in this ecosystem assessment we will work on tackling together as a group. So that is the summary of the project. If any of you are interested in the details behind the design or implementation or evaluation of the project itself, Hannah and I will be in a room during our breakout sessions later to answer any questions. But for now, I'm going to hand it over to Hannah to lead us through the ecosystem assessment and get us set up for those breakout conversations.
Thanks, Dana. Hi, everybody. Nice to be with you today. I'm Hannah Layton. As Dana said, this past year, we introduced an ecosystem assessment called Farm to Early Childhood in New England, Visualizing the Landscape. And this assessment is really an overview of the current early childhood system in New England and was designed to help FINE and our partners better understand this sector broadly and to use it to identify key opportunities for expanding farm to EC work in New England. We used an interactive mapping tool for this project called Kumu, and we're really hopeful that this resource can be useful to a number of audiences, including those that are really just looking to learn more about the sector, those that are already deep in this work and already working to expand farm to EC efforts, and those who are in decision-making positions who can use this to identify those levers and those opportunities and really make investments and allocate resources towards the evolution of this work. We worked on this project between December 2021 and January of 2023, during which we spoke to over 30 individuals from across the 6 states. We gleaned information through virtual interviews, email exchanges, and by attending early childhood meetings across the region. And many of the folks who are on this call right now contributed to that research. So I just want to say how grateful we are to all of you for sharing your knowledge and your time with us. I'm going to click over to the actual assessment in a minute, but I wanted to give a kind of high-level snapshot of what you'll find in there, since it's a big document and we're not going to go through the whole thing today. So to start, the assessment gives an overview of the key aspects that we've identified of early childhood in New England. It also includes deep dives into each state, and we look specifically at the key players and interest holders, the professional development that exists, the policies that exist, and the funding. We also have identified a series of opportunities across 4 primary categories, which are regional coordination, farm to early childhood professional development, federal, state, and local policy, and increased funding streams. And these will be touched on in our breakout sessions a little bit later. We also, as I said, highlighted each state across several different areas, and we've taken these opportunities and identified where states have had successes and where we see opportunities for each state to continue this work. So I am going to navigate us over here and walk us through the assessment, and we'll share a link to the tool if you haven't already had a chance to dive in, so you can look through it on your own. As I said, there's a lot in here, but we wanted to walk you through a few sections to get us warmed up for our breakout discussions. So just a quick kind of tutorial on how to get in here. When you go to the website, you're going to click on Start Presentation, and you'll see arrows on the right and the left side of the screen, and you'll use those to navigate through the assessment. And one thing to tell you that at this point, Kumu, the tool we're using, doesn't allow you to hop around from section to section, so you do need to kind of navigate through the tool. So get to know this table of contents and then start clicking, because there's lots to see. So the early section of the assessment will give you a little bit more information on how to use it. We dive into some of what Dana shared around what farm to early childhood is and how we see this as a strategy for reducing food insecurity and building food sovereignty. There's more information in here on the New England Farm to Early Childhood project that Dana shared. And we also dive into the methodology if you're interested in learning more about how we built this tool. But today, I really want to focus on what we're calling the nuts and bolts of early childhood section. And in this section, we focus or we look at 5 key areas of early childhood and the entities or agencies who are overseeing them. And while these 5 focus areas aren't necessarily directly tied to farm to early childhood, we see them as really important pieces of this puzzle as we start to talk about introducing programming. And the organizations that oversee them are really important players who we feel should be involved in these conversations about farm to early childhood. And those 5 key areas are administration of the Child Care and Development Block Grant, or CCDBG, child care licensing, administration, and oversight, quality improvement systems oversight, the Head Start Collaboration Office, and administration of the Child and Adult Care Food Program, or CACFP. And you can see in this graphic that each of those 5 areas are in green text on the right side here, and each of the circles represents an entity or an agency who is supporting or managing one of those areas. And they're color-coded by state. I know the key is very small, but orange starting at the left is Connecticut, the sort of teal is Massachusetts, that kind of olivey color is New Hampshire, yellow is Rhode Island, bright green is Vermont, and blue is Maine. So you can sort of follow those colors if you're interested in one state. And throughout this assessment, and also just in our time together today in general, we're really going to emphasize how important it is to have dedicated partners across state agencies who are communicating and collaborating with each other, and also how having lots of partners can add some complexity. So the lines show us how these different entities are working together, and in some cases, how they might not yet be working together. So I'm going to flip around a little bit in here and show you some of what we cover in here, and also hopefully give you a bit of background for when we go into the breakouts. But I encourage you to really get in here and navigate through this tool yourself as well. So the first area I want to touch on is in our federal funding section, specifically CCDBG. And I want to point out that early childhood is unique from public K through 12 schools, in that funding doesn't typically come out of education funds, but rather it flows out of the federal government and into an early childhood office. And the home of these offices varies from state to state. So these happen to also be the early childhood offices, as well as the offices that oversee CCDBG. In Rhode Island, Vermont, and Maine, the early childhood office is housed within the state's Department of Health under Human Services. In New Hampshire, there's currently not a designated office, but early childhood is also managed by the state's DHHS. And in Massachusetts and Connecticut, a unique office or department has been established outside of the state's Department of Health and Human Services to oversee early childhood. And in the CCDBG section where we start, and I'm going to kind of sit here for a minute in this section, because this is the biggest block of federal early childhood funding that's available most universally to facilities. And this funding flows to each state and supports 3 buckets of work: tuition, assistance, quality, and capacity building. And again, you can see here, I think we can zoom this in a little bit. You can see here the entities that are overseeing those financial assistance programs. The bulk of this money goes to support tuition assistance, and the rest of the funds go to increase the quality of the programs through things like professional development and QRIS, quality improvement rating systems. And then the final bucket is capacity building, and that's things like the preschool development grant. And I'm pausing on this section because the federal funding conversation ties into Farm to EC in a number of ways that we're going to go into later on in more detail. Broadly speaking, big picture, I'll mention that CCDBG funding, while it doesn't currently fund food programs, there's a real case to be made for the relationship between optimal nutrition, early childhood development, and quality childcare. And so increasing CCDBG funding and allowing those funds to be allocated towards optimal nutrition programs is one way that we've identified to create more equitable access to nutritious food in early childhood settings. In the meantime, many states are also taking advantage of other federal funding streams for their Farm to EC programs, and that's going to be a whole breakout group on its own in just a bit. I'm going to navigate us over a couple of pages. So I also mentioned that a portion of those funds go towards efforts to increase the quality of programs. So quality recognition improvement systems, or QRIS, for example, is a voluntary system that allows sites to basically opt in and then assess, improve, and communicate about the quality of the care that they're offering. And these programs are typically conducted are contracted rather out to a third party. So you can see we've now added some additional entities to our map here. And these programs use a sort of standard set of requirements, and reimbursements are often tied to the ratings in those systems. And I bring this up because there is a growing movement towards new quality improvement models that allow programs to report out on activities and areas where they feel that they've been successful and have excelled, rather than using that standardized rating system. Connecticut has sort of made this shift. Vermont is in the process of making this shift. And so in these models, sites that have, for example, a farm to EC program can really highlight those activities in their reporting so that families can prioritize sites with those kinds of programs if they choose. We're also going to talk a little bit later about professional development and how embedding farm to early childhood trainings into professional development, which is required of providers and receives funding, can also be a really effective strategy for building garden and nutrition programs. So if you come into the tool, you'll see in this section different types of PD requirements that exist and where states might be able to add farm to EC offerings. So I know I've skipped around a bit here, so I'm going to go back and just quickly show you what some of these other pages include. So I skipped over Head Start in our federal funding section, but this slide shows who is managing Head Start and why it's really important for agencies to be communicating if there's a different entity that's overseeing Head Start and CCDBG. In New England, all of the states except for one are it's one entity. In Maine, we have 2 different offices that are overseeing those programs. We also look in this section at things like other entitlement funding streams. We look at who's overseeing childcare licensing and regulation, which is another place where we see foundational PD that's required. We look at accreditation. We look at CACFP. And we explore this one way that sites are offering food to children and who may or may not be participating in these programs. And in New England, you can see that CACFP is managed by the Department of Education in each state, a different agency than the one that's overseeing licensing and CCDBG funding. So we can start to see that there's like a layer of complexity added to the different partners that are working on different parts of this sector. And also a lot of opportunity for collaboration between them. And in the last section, I'll just point out before I get into the state, is that we do look at policy at the federal, state, and local level that's influencing this sector. I mentioned earlier that we have identified 4 key opportunities. I'm not going to go into these in too much detail because we're really going to dive in the breakouts, but I would just highlight a few of the topics that fall under each. So the first is growing statewide and regional coordination. This includes things like establishing farm to EC networks in each state, strengthening statewide coordination between state agencies. The second is around professional development. As I mentioned, we'll have a breakout room on both of these later on. And this includes things like expanding or incorporating farm to early childhood trainings into existing professional development opportunities, as well as expanding these opportunities to folks that are working on topics that may not be traditionally thought of as farm to early childhood, like food insecurity or food justice or health equity. The third opportunity is around state, local, and federal policy. So we look at things like how universal meals impacts early childhood, reimbursement policies, down to wellness policies and everything in between. And then the fourth is increasing funding streams for farm to EC. And this includes everything from leveraging state budgets for this kind of activity to leveraging federal grants like the USDA Farm to School grant. So in just a minute, I'm going to hand it over to each of our state partners to share a success from their state. And that's going to sort of lead us into our breakout rooms. But I wanted to just give a kind of quick overview of what a state section looks like so that you know what's in here if you want to come back in later and check out your own state. And we're going to use Connecticut as an example because they are first in the alphabet and because I know that we have a big Connecticut group here today. So as I mentioned, we're looking at 4 different areas. We're looking at the interest holders, the funding, the policy, and the professional development. So to start, we took those 5 key categories again and zoomed in on each state's organizations and how they are working with each other on these areas. If the state has any kind of early childhood alliance or steering committee, we've highlighted those organizations and how they are working with those state agencies as well. We look at how farm to school and farm to early childhood are working together. In many states, farm to early childhood work is coming out of a farm to school collaborative. Not all of them. In Connecticut, it is. So we highlight any kind of farm to EC task force or community of practice that has formed and how that is related to the state level farm to school work as well as the Northeast farm to school work. We highlight any kind of funding that has supported this work, whether that's state budgets or federal grants or something else. We look at professional development opportunities that exist for early childhood providers and anybody who is already offering farm to early childhood trainings within those systems. Each state has a policy spotlight that looks at some way that they have leveraged policy to build this work. And then we also highlight 1 case study in each state. So in Connecticut, we're looking at a collaboration between an early childhood magnet school and a community farm and how they're building relationships around teaching kids to grow food. And then finally, we look at the successes and opportunities in each state. So this is like a digestible way that we've taken everything from within the state section so you can print this page out, bring it into a conversation with partners and really think about where you want to go with this work in your state. I am going to take us back to the deck now. I know that is a lot of information, so thank you for bearing with me, and please feel free to take that link that we'll share at the end and look through here at your own pace. I'm now going to hand it over to each of our state partners to just give a sort of 1 to 2 minute snapshot of a success that they're going to dive into more in our breakout sessions. And I am going to start by handing it to Maine.
And this is what happens when we don't do rehearsal. Thank you, Hannah. Dawn Littlefield-Gordon here. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this event. And I actually work as a contracted state employee and have for about 14 years. So MCD Global Health is the organization that holds the contract, but I officially operate as a Maine CDC state employee overseeing obesity prevention. So my big hook for all this is, of course, obesity and chronic disease prevention. And I think part of what I will be diving into is really the establishment of our Farm to Early Care and Education Committee through a larger leadership team called the PAN and ECE. And I think that it's led to many great successes in our state, including some procurement pilots and some education and an actual module that was built for early care and education providers to learn about Farm to ECE. And I'm excited to talk about that. Hannah, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Dawn. All right, our friends in New Hampshire.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Noreen Mena, a registered dietitian and assistant professor at the University of New Hampshire. And I just want to give a quick shout out to my colleague and friend from Extension, Kate Graves, who's also on the call today. So briefly, just want to share New Hampshire is still in the very, we call baby toddler stage in terms of our Farm to ECE capacity. Our farm to school network is pretty robust and well established. And so what's been really exciting about joining this community of practice is also seeing our peers in New England that have already gone through some of the processes that we're embarking on in terms of getting some farm to ECE awareness and activities momentum in the state. And I look forward to sharing more about how we were able to use the ecosystem assessment tool to essentially support our goal of starting to generate statewide partnerships through some coalition building. So looking forward to whoever joins us in the breakout session, and I'll turn it back to you, Hannah.
Thanks, Maureen. Connecticut.
Hello, everyone. I'm Shannon Rader Ginsburg, and I'm with Yukon Extension and work with the Put Local on Your Tray project. And so we're going to be, our big partner in our Farm to EC work has been Department of Public Health. And so I'll just be talking a little bit about that journey and the connecting of our farm to early care work, which is somewhat new for Yukon Extension to be getting into, with the Connecticut Farm to School Collaborative and the K through 12 farm to school work that's been going on. I'm also a member of the steering committee of that collaborative. And again, it's definitely also still in a toddler phase here. And a lot of our work has been trying to discover a lot of how early care works to bring the farm and food lens to support a lot of the goals that already exist.
Thanks, Shannon. Rhode Island.
Hi, everyone. I'm Heidi Hetzler. I am a registered dietitian, and I'm the program coordinator for SNAP Ed, which is housed here at the University of Rhode Island. I wanted to chat for just a minute about a success we had a few years ago on a team nutrition grant, where the Rhode Island Department of Education actually received the grant to support a combination of nutrition education, wellness policies, and CACFP meal pattern compliance with sponsors who participate in CACFP. It was not exclusively built as a farm to EC intervention, but it did have a strong emphasis on that. We used the USDA's Grow It, Try It, Like It curriculum as a main focus for the work, which you can see a picture here of some educators receiving a training and materials related to that kit. We were really excited as a SNAP Ed implementer to work as a partner on the grant, along with Farm Fresh Rhode Island, who's a local nonprofit that works to support the local food system by connecting farms and eaters. And we were able to reach over 250 ECE providers, which is a good chunk of providers in our small state. And it was just a really great example of that cross-sector partnership where we had, a federal nutrition education grant, SNAP Ed, which was through a university. We had a nonprofit, and then we had a state agency, all providing, their particular expertise to create a really great project. It's also a really nice showcase of two federal nutrition pots of money, which is the breakout that we'll be facilitating with Connecticut to talk about how to utilize different pots of money for Farm to EC, because they do exist in many places. So hope to see some of you in our breakout.
Thanks, Heidi. And that wasn't me trying to rush you to get to Vermont. That was an accidental click, but I will hand it over to Vermont now.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, my name is Cynthia Green, and I'm with Shelburne Farms. And I also want to give a shout out to my close partner, Keely Egan, with Hunger Free Vermont today, because we've both been engaged in this work. But Vermont today in our breakout room, we'll be talking really about our professional development system and how we leveraged very early on in our farm to early childhood efforts, how we've been leveraging our state PD systems, both to build awareness of farm to early childhood efforts, but also to build demand from our early childhood educators and our programs. We'll be able to describe in more detail how this approach has helped us both do both of those things, spread awareness while sorry, I lost my place, and raising demand for farm to early childhood, and how we've been adapting. That's where I'm headed, how we've adapted our professional development to align with multiple professional development systems. Again, this takes partners and our technical assistants to support early educators and early education programs. So we hope to be able to engage in a conversation about this opportunity.
Thanks, Cynthia. And Massachusetts.
Yes, hi, my name's Rena Zampirone. I'm the statewide early education manager for Mass Audubon and thrilled to be presenting alongside my partner at DESE, Irene Sadako. Um, we've had some really awesome success in the past year and a half around really focusing on the PD side of things and providing educational content around farming and gardening and healthy eating with young children. And so through this partnership that we have here, we've been able to create a 3-part series all about working with kids and gardening in early education programs. And we've been lucky enough to already start offering it not only on a statewide level through our Department of Early Education and Care, but also on a national level through several pretty major conferences coming up. And very excited to say that we'll be presenting all about it at NACE this year down in Nashville, Tennessee. So if any of you are going to be there, we'll hope to see you there and maybe you can come join us.
Thanks, Rena. All right, so what we're going to do next is we have 4 breakout rooms. I'm going to share a little overview about each of them. I think we got a good kind of taste of what will be included in each of those. And then we'll spend about half an hour, 40 minutes having some discussion. So, so group 1 will be Maine and New Hampshire. And this conversation is really going to focus on statewide and regional collaboration, building partnerships within the state. The second group will be with Connecticut and Rhode Island, and this is really going to be focusing on leveraging funding that's available to support these programs. Group 3 will be with Vermont and Massachusetts, and we'll focus on expanding equitable PD, professional development opportunities. And then group 4 will be with Dana and myself, and this will be for anyone just interested in continuing the conversation about the COP or the ecosystem assessment or sort of setting up the kind of regional bones of this work.
Well, I know it's hard to be interrupted, but I hope that we're bringing you back from some juicy conversations that will continue after this webinar. And yeah, we'd like to just take a few minutes to hear some key takeaways from the facilitators of each of the breakout rooms. So let's just go in order. Group 1.
Hi, that's me. And so I'll share, and Dawn and Kate, if you want to add anything else, but we had a really great discussion on, what does it mean to grow partnerships and expand our network opportunities. And so key takeaways is really understanding who are the individuals you want at the table, being flexible and knowing that there could be shared interests, but not everyone has capacity. So for context, we're talking about coalition building, and right, what is the labor force driving that? Human beings, right? And so understanding that there might be limitations in people to show up because of other things, and being flexible and really understanding that those that can be at the table will be there when they can. We talked about one of the benefits of growing networks, bridging the gap, kind of, as someone said, blowing up the vertical silos and working together horizontally, collective impact, right? So multiple organizations working towards a common shared goal. One of the benefits of expanding our networks and growing partnerships at the state level. I'll leave it there, but if Kate or Dawn want to add anything else.
I think we were just ending on how we can use the eco assessment as a framework for other states to be able to identify key partners to be able to build coalitions.
Yeah, and it's I think that one of the things that we also hit on was the care and feeding of a coalition, that it ebbs and flows. So it may seem like one year you're really super on track, and then the next year you're rebuilding your relationships. That's a constant. So I think you hit all of the key notes though, Noreen.
It's fun, rewarding, but has its challenges.
For sure. Great. Thank you, Group 1. Group 2, state and regional funding.
Yeah, hi, that's me. So Shannon from Connecticut and Heidi from Rhode Island just spent a good amount of time really talking about their own experiences with funding. Shannon with USDA and other grants, and Heidi with the Team Nutrition Grant, which is also USDA, but really leveraging also SNAP Ed funding. So with that, we had posed a few questions to the group. And I would say some sort of key takeaways were funding at different levels. How can we be thinking about larger federal grants and the time and work that it takes to get to something like that you really need the partnerships, the networking, and that it does really take time. But having said that, there are smaller grants, mini grants that are available to, childcare centers or family childcare homes, and those are also, possibilities. Imya from the Association of State Public Health Nutritionists shared some wonderful resources related to funding, which we're happy to share back with the group. Yeah, I think a sort of really thinking about building similar to the first group, building partnerships is really critical, and really looking to leverage existing partnerships, for example, farm to school, but thinking about farm to ECE, but also thinking about the priorities of the other groups, again, to leverage potentially larger grants. And Heidi and Shannon, please, or anybody else from the group, please feel free to weigh in.
Shannon is sharing that resource you mentioned, Allison.
And I can put the other one in too.
Thank you. Yeah, and we'll compile all of these and send them out at the end with the recording as well. Great, thank you, Group 2. Group 3, expanding professional development opportunities.
Yeah, I think one of the huge takeaways from ours is that, when working on creating accessible PDs for early educators, flexibility is really a huge part of the game. The ability to work with different groups to find times that work for them, because we know that the hours are so long and unpredictable, to providing a range of translated materials, to really work within the diverse communities that you are serving, to make sure that you're presenting information that is relevant and accessible to them. And even things as simple as offering food, if it's an in-person training, can be huge, because as we know, early educators don't get 2 seconds to sit down, much less to actually eat their lunches. So trying to really think about how do we really serve the early educators as part of these trainings and make these trainings relevant, accessible, something they can actually get credit for as well, which is very individual by state. So just kind of thinking that big picture, how do we make these, a really positive and beneficial experience for each of the groups that we're working with.
Thanks, Rena. Sound like lots of great conversations. We hope you all will stay in touch, and thanks so much for coming and sharing your ideas and questions. I want to thank all of our community of practice members, my fine colleagues, the new Northeast Farm to School Collaborative, and USDA for making this project possible. And to all of you for your interest and the good work that you're doing in this sector.